Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves walking along the quiet shoreline of San Diego, where the ocean presses its eternal rhythm against the sand and the night air carries a faint, salt-laden chill. Just ahead, rising like a dream from another time, stands the Hotel del Coronado. Its turrets and red rooftops glow faintly under the moonlight, as though it has secrets to keep, stories to whisper, and shadows that never truly vanish. This is not just a hotel. It is a place layered with memory, with echoes that cling to its corridors, and a hush that feels heavier than silence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The great wooden structure seems alive when first approached at night. Its Victorian spires and lattice balconies loom against the dark, each pane of glass catching some faint shimmer of the ocean's reflection. Stepping through the grand entrance, you might notice how sound changes. Outside, waves crash. Voices carry footsteps, leave crisp prints on the sand. Inside, though, the world becomes muffled, as if the walls themselves have taken it upon them to swallow stray noises. Carpets soak each step in muted fabric, and the hallways stretch long, their lamps glowing with a golden haze that seems dimmer the farther you walk. That night, a guest checked in alone. Her name was Eleanor, though she rarely used it. Most people simply called her Nora. She carried only a small leather case, worn smooth at the handles, and her eyes carried that restless look of someone searching for escape. To the staff, she seemed unremarkable, just another solitary figure arriving as twilight deepened. Yet there was something in the way. She glanced upward toward the upper floors, as though she had been here before, or perhaps heard whispers of what resided within. The lobby clock ticked loudly, its brass pendulum swinging with precise rhythm. Nora signed her name quickly, her handwriting a slender scrawl across the registry. The clerk, polite and unassuming, handed her a brass key attached to a heavy fob, engraved with the number 3327. "Top floor," he said quietly, his voice almost reluctant, as if rehearsing words he'd spoken before, countless times to countless others. The climb to the third floor was uneventful, yet with each step, the air seemed to grow heavier, as if unseen eyes tracked her ascent. Carpets gave way to polished wood near the upper corridors, and here the lamps burned less brightly, their halos thin and frail. Nora moved with the deliberate pace of one who listens closely. Behind her, she thought she caught the faint echo of another footstep, slightly out of rhythm with her own. When she stopped, it stopped. She allowed herself a breath and a half smile, reminding herself that hotels like this often carried tricks of acoustics, echoes that imitated company where none existed. Her room waited at the far end of the hallway. The brass key slid into the lock, catching with a subtle resistance before giving way. Inside, the room smelled faintly of lavender polish and old wood. The window overlooked the ocean, where moonlight shattered into shifting silver fragments. The bedspread was neatly turned down, a single chair stood angled beside the dresser, and on the desk a glass of water reflected the lamp's glow. Nothing out of place, and yet Nora felt a subtle shift in her chest, as though the room had been anticipating her arrival. She unpacked little. A folded nightdress, a worn journal, and a book whose spine bore no title. Setting them on the desk, she sat in the lone chair and listened. From somewhere beyond her walls came a faint strain of sound, perhaps a piano. The notes were slow, uncertain, as if played by hesitant fingers. They rose and fell, then faded into silence again. Nora did not leave the room that first night. Instead, she sat by the window, gazing at the black horizon where sea met sky. The ocean's surface shivered with moonlight, and occasionally she thought she saw a pale shape drift along the beach far below. The figure seemed to waver, too insubstantial to belong to flesh and bone. But each time she leaned closer, It vanished, leaving only the ceaseless tide. Midnight came quietly. The clock in the hallway chimed its tones, muffled, yet insistent. At that moment, a sudden draft stirred the curtains, though the window remained latched. The lamp flickered once, and the water in the glass trembled, rippling outward, as though disturbed by some unseen tremor. Nora's fingers brushed the journal, but she hesitated, her gaze fixed on the far corner of the room. There, where shadow pooled deepest, she thought she saw the outline of a figure. A woman, perhaps her form, blurred edges dissolving into darkness. The air thickened with a scent like faded roses, sweet and wilting. Nora blinked, and the corner was empty. She told herself it was exhaustion, the kind that draws shapes from shadow and breathes movement into stillness. Yet as she lay down upon the bed, a whisper seemed to stir against her ear. It was not words, not quite, but the impression of breath, warm and fleeting. She turned sharply, but the room lay still, every object in place, every shadow unmoving. Sleep came fitfully threaded with half-dreams of long hallways and unseen footsteps behind her. Once she awoke to the faint creak of the chair shifting as if bearing weight, though she could not bring herself to look. Instead, she closed her eyes tighter, pressing herself into the pillow, waiting for silence to return. Morning brought sunlight and the illusion of peace. The hotel bustled faintly with guests moving to breakfast, with staff polishing banisters and arranging flowers in tall vases. Nora carried herself through it, all her face neutral, but her mind restless. For she could not shake the memory of the roses, the whisper, or the shadow in the corner that had seemed almost human. She resolved not to mention it. Some places, she reasoned, carry memory like a stain. Perhaps Hotel del Coronado was one such place. Yet as she passed down the grand staircase and felt again that curious hush wrapping around her, she could not help but sense that the hotel itself had noticed her presence and would not easily let her go. The day stretched ahead with the kind of brightness only the California coast can muster. Sunlight glittering against the polished windows of the hotel, the red rooftops standing proudly against the sky. From the beach, laughter and voices carried faintly drifting upward through the salt-laden air. Yet inside, beyond the walls of the Hotel del Coronado, there remained that curious hush, as though the building itself resisted the intrusion of daylight. Nora moved through the corridors slowly, her shoes clicking softly against the polished floors. She carried her journal with her tucked close beneath her arm, as though reluctant to leave it behind. Each corner seemed to pull her attention, each closed door, a reminder of rooms filled with private secrets, unseen and waiting. There was no malice in the silence, only watchfulness, the kind that presses lightly on the back of one's neck. She descended toward the grand dining room where the morning crowd murmured over coffee and clinking cutlery. Sunlight poured through tall windows, turning the silverware into scattered prisms. She chose a table at the edge, where she could keep her gaze on the room. The food arrived without comment, and though she ate mechanically, her eyes lingered on the staff moving quietly between tables. They never seemed rushed, never distracted. Yet when their eyes flicked toward her, even for an instant, she sensed an unspoken question there, a kind of recognition unearned. It was while sipping her coffee that she noticed the mirror. It stood tall against the far wall, framed in carved oak, reflecting the room in softened light. Her own image appeared faint, washed slightly by the angle. And yet, when she blinked just for a moment, she saw another reflection standing directly behind her chair. A woman dressed in black, her form delicate and pale, her head tilted as if to whisper into Nora's ear. The coffee cup trembled in her hand. She turned quickly, her heart thudding with sudden force. No one was there. guests moved calmly about their breakfasts. Conversations continued without pause. She glanced back to the mirror, but now it showed only her alone, her pale face tinged with unease. Leaving the dining room early, she wandered through the hotel's lobby once more. Sunlight pooled across the tiles, glinting against brass fixtures and tall plants placed with deliberate care. A pair of guests laughed as they passed her by, their voices sharp against the quiet. Yet above it all, faint and elusive, she thought she heard the sound again. A piano, distant notes trailing like fragments of memory. She followed it, her steps leading her down narrower halls where fewer lamps burned and the walls pressed closer together. The music led her toward a small parlor where the hotel kept an old upright piano against the far wall. Its lid was open, the keys white and black beneath the filtered light of half-drawn curtains. Yet the bench was empty, and the air was still. The last notes hung ghost-like in her ear, though her mind told her they could not exist. She approached, slowly resting her hand against the smooth wood of the instrument. Dust lay thin across the top, catching motes of light that drifted lazily in the air. She pressed one key, soft, tentative. The sound rang out clean and true, yet lonely in the silence. When she withdrew her hand, she noticed a faint impression on the bench's cushion, as though someone had only just risen. That evening, as twilight bled across the horizon, Nora found herself drawn outside. The beach stretched vast and pale waves rolling in endless procession, the breeze tugging at her hair and carrying the faint tang of salt. From this distance, the hotel looked both magnificent and strange. Its towers etched against the fading sky, its windows glowing warmly, as if watching the world with countless eyes. She wandered near the shoreline, her shoes sinking into cool sand, and thought again of the faint figure she had glimpsed from her window the night before. She scanned the distance, her eyes tracing the water's edge. For a while, there was nothing but the shifting silver of the tide. Then, as the last of the daylight slipped away, she saw it again, a pale figure drifting slowly along the beach. This time she did not look away. The figure appeared distinctly feminine, its long dress moving without sound, untouched by wind or water. Its head was slightly bowed, arms close to its sides. It did not leave footprints, though the sand beneath it shifted faintly. Nora's breath caught her pulse quickening, and yet she found herself stepping closer, compelled by something deeper than curiosity. But just as she neared, the figure seemed to dissolve, folding into the mist, rising from the sea. One moment, clear and fragile as glass. The next, gone, leaving only the sound of waves crashing, eternal and indifferent. Nora lingered until night fully claimed the shore, the stars appearing one by one above the dark horizon. At last she returned toward the hotel, her footsteps slow, her thoughts clouded. The lobby greeted her with warm lamps and polite nods from passing guests. Yet when she passed by the tall mirror once more, she avoided looking at it, her eyes fixed firmly ahead. In her room, the curtains stirred faintly, though the window remained shut. The scent of roses returned, faint and bittersweet. She sat at the desk, pen poised above her journal, and wrote only one line before closing it again. She is here. And though the night stretched long and restless, Nora could not bring herself to blow out the lamp, for she feared what the darkness might reveal. The lamp burned low through the night, its golden light spilling across the dresser and the folded shadows of the room. Nora lay awake beneath the covers, listening. The silence of the hotel was not complete. It never was. Somewhere beyond her door, the floorboards would creak at intervals, though no footsteps followed. From time to time, the faintest knock, like the tip of a fingernail against wood, touched her ears and then receded into stillness again. When sleep did come, it was shallow and broken. She dreamed of corridors that bent in impossible directions, the wallpaper bleeding into darkness, and doors that opened to reveal not rooms, but an endless tide rushing in. In the dream, she saw the woman again, the figure in black standing at the far end of a hallway, her face hidden beneath a lace veil. The woman raised her hand, slowly beckoning. Nora felt herself move forward without willing it drawn closer until the veil lifted ever so slightly, revealing only the suggestion of lips curved into something between sorrow and invitation. She woke before she could see more, her skin damp, the lamp still burning, the scent of roses pressing faintly in the air. The next morning, she descended the staircase with a heaviness she could not quite name. The lobby bustled faintly with new arrivals, bellhops wheeling carts of luggage, voices echoing against the high ceiling. Yet despite the activity, she sensed something just beneath the surface, a tension subtle but undeniable, like a note struck too softly to fade away. At the front desk, she paused. The clerk from the night before looked up, his expression polite but distant. She leaned slightly toward him, lowering her voice. "Has anyone ever mentioned strange things here in the rooms?" The clerk's pen halted briefly against the ledger, but he did not raise his eyes. "The hotel is old," he said evenly, as if repeating a phrase long practiced. "Old buildings carry sounds, drafts, things that might unsettle guests unused to them." Nora pressed her lips together. "But have they ever spoken of a woman?" This time, the clerk looked at her, his gaze steady but unreadable. "Some stories," he admitted after a moment. "But stories cling to places like this. Best not to dwell." He offered a small smile, courteous but final, before returning to his work. Unsatisfied, Nora left the counter, her thoughts restless. She drifted through the hallways again, her steps carrying her to corners where few guests lingered. The third floor especially seemed quieter than the rest. Doors closed upon themselves with a hush, and the carpets muffled every sound until the silence grew nearly oppressive. It was there she first noticed the framed photographs hanging at measured intervals along the wall. Old images, sepia-toned, capturing the hotel in earlier days. Ladies in high collars, gentlemen in tailored suits, children in lace dresses, standing stiffly before the lens. One photograph caught her attention. It showed a woman alone, standing at the very edge of the hotel's rear staircase. She was dressed in black, her hat casting a shadow across her eyes. The caption beneath it read only, "Unidentified guest 1892. Nora stared for a long time, her breath shallow. The posture, the silhouette, it was the same figure she had seen along the beach in the reflection in her dreams. Her fingers brushed lightly against the frame's glass, tracing the outline. The faint chill of it lingered on her skin even after she pulled away. That evening, she returned to her room earlier than usual, unsettled by the discovery. The journal lay open on the desk, the single line from the night before staring back at her. She considered writing more, recording what she had seen in the photograph, but her hand trembled when she lifted the pen. Instead, she left the page blank, as if unwilling to give the memory permanence. The hours passed slowly. Outside her window, the ocean breathed its eternal rhythm, waves folding into themselves. Inside, the air seemed heavier with each passing moment. The scent of roses grew stronger, not merely a trace now, but almost tangible, as though a bouquet rested unseen in the room. She sat upright in the chair, heart quickening when she heard it, a soft exhale, distinctly human, rising from the far corner, where the shadows pooled deepest, her eyes fixed on that darkness. For a long moment, nothing shifted, nothing stirred. Then, with deliberate slowness, a shape began to form, pale at first, like smoke coiling against the wall, then resolving into the figure of a woman. She wore a black dress that seemed to drink the light, her veil falling over her face in delicate lace. Nora could not move. The woman stood motionless, her presence filling the room with a grief so heavy it pressed against Nora's chest. When at last she raised her head, the veil quivered slightly, as though stirred by breath. A whisper escaped, faint and fragile, the syllables almost lost to silence. "Stay." The word dissolved into the air, yet its weight remained. The lamp flickered, once shadows stretching long across the floor. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman was gone, leaving only the scent of roses and the echo of that single command lingering in Nora's ears. She sat frozen long after the room, still the air heavy. And though every part of her screamed to flee, she remained rooted, for some part of her understood she had been noticed. And the hotel, in its own quiet way, had begun to draw her deeper into its memory. The morning came, but it brought Nora no comfort. The sunlight streaming in through the tall windows seemed thinner, as though the air itself had dulled. She felt restless, her body moving as if through water, her mind replaying that single whispered word. Stay. It was not a threat, not exactly. It had been more like a plea, heavy with longing, like someone clutching at the edge of a dream they refused to release. Nora decided she could not remain in her room. She dressed quickly and left, descending into the hotel's grand corridors once more. The lobby was alive with travelers arriving, their trunks clattering over marble, their voices filling the air. To Nora, it all seemed strangely distant, like she was moving through a stage set where the actors didn't see her. She found herself in the library, a room lined with dark shelves, the scent of old paper and leather binding lingering faintly. Heavy curtains filtered the sunlight, casting the room in amber. Guests rarely lingered here, and Nora felt a measure of relief in its quiet. She ran her fingers along the spines of books until one fell open on the table before her. It was a guest ledger, bound in worn leather. The handwriting sprawled across the pages, looping and careful, dated from the late 1800s. She scanned the entries, names and room numbers, each a trace of someone who had walked these halls long before her. But midway through, her hand stilled. A name had been carefully written, the ink darker, as though the writer pressed harder against the page. Kate Morgan, room 3327. Nora whispered the name aloud, without meaning to the sound breaking the quiet. Her skin prickled. She remembered the photograph on the third floor, the woman in black, whose caption read only, "Unidentified guest 1892. The name fit like a missing piece, though her chest tightened at the thought. Later that afternoon, she took the stairway up to the third floor again. The corridor was dim. Only half the wall lamps lit the patterned carpet, swallowing her steps. She paused before room 3327. The door stood plain and ordinary, its brass numbers gleaming softly in the light. Yet it radiated something different, a subtle gravity that made her throat dry. She placed her hand against the wood, and for a moment, she thought she felt a faint pulse, as though the door itself carried a heartbeat. She drew her hand back quickly, breath uneven. As she turned to leave, she noticed movement down the hall. A maid, dressed in the hotel's uniform, was moving slowly from room to room, balancing a tray of folded linens. Her footsteps made no sound on the carpet. When she reached Nora, she paused, her face pale and unreadable. "You shouldn't linger there," the maid said softly, almost kindly. Nora hesitated. "Why not?" The woman's eyes flicked to the brass numbers, then back to Nora. "Some doors remember more than others. Best to leave them be." Without another word, she moved on her figure, dissolving into the length of the corridor, her cart rolling soundlessly. That night, the sea wind rattled faintly against the window pane. Nora sat at her desk, the ledger entry repeating in her mind. Kate Morgan. She began to write, her pen scratching furiously across the journal's pages, though she scarcely knew what she meant to capture. The stories she had heard of tragic guests, The scent of roses, the fleeting figure by the shore, they were not fragments anymore. They circled around a name, a presence with history. It was near midnight when the scratching of her pen was interrupted by another sound, faint footsteps pacing outside her door. Not hurried, but deliberate, moving back and forth as though someone was waiting. She froze her breath, caught listening as the footsteps halted just outside. Silence pressed heavily, broken only when she heard it again. The soft, unmistakable whisper this time from directly beyond the door. Stay. Her body tightened fear, and a strange pull mingling inside her. She rose against her own better sense and placed her hand on the doorknob. The metal was cold, shockingly so, like something taken from ice. She turned it slowly, easing the door open just a sliver. The corridor beyond lay empty. The lamps flickered shadows, stretching across the carpet. No one stood there, yet the air was heavy with roses cloying and sweet. And at the far end of the hallway, she thought she saw it again, the faint outline of a figure in black, her veil shimmering slightly in the weak light. Nora stepped back quickly, slamming the door shut and pressing her back against it, her pulse pounding in her ears. The whisper seemed to linger, though no sound followed. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat upright in her chair, watching the lamplight waver across the walls. The scent of roses never faded. It hung in the air until dawn, reminding her of what waited, what watched, and what perhaps would never let her go. Dawn crept into the room reluctantly, as if the morning itself hesitated to disturb the shadows that had clung so tightly through the night. Nora sat at the desk, still, her eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness, her body heavy with fatigue. The lamp had sputtered out on its own just before sunrise, and when it did, she could have sworn she saw a pale hand brush against the flame, snuffing it in silence. The weight of the hours pressed down on her, but she refused to lie back in the bed. The bed now felt foreign, as though it belonged to someone else. Instead, she gathered her journal and stepped into the hall, drawn by a need to move, to shake off the residue of the night. The corridor stretched quiet before her. A single cleaning cart leaned against the wall, but no attendant was near. Her footsteps echoed faintly against the carpet, a lonely sound swallowed by the length of the hall. She descended to the lobby, where the air was filled with the smell of coffee and pastries, the murmur of conversations, the shuffle of suitcases. It should have grounded her. It should have reminded her of the ordinary. Yet standing among the cheerful guests, she felt even more apart, like a ghost herself, moving unseen. Her eyes kept drifting toward the far corner of the lobby, where a second staircase curved upward, narrower than the grand central one, shrouded slightly in shadow. She hadn't noticed it before, and yet now it pulled at her attention insistently. The staircase wound upward into a quieter part of the hotel. The walls here bore fewer photographs, the carpets darker, the lamps dimmer. She passed a long stretch of closed doors, their brass numbers dulled with age. The air grew cooler, and the faint salt of the ocean gave way to something more floral roses, again thick and inescapable. She reached the top of the stairs and found herself facing a door unlike the others. Its paint was older, the wood slightly warped, as though the hotel itself had forgotten to maintain it. A brass number plate clung stubbornly to the door, 3327. Her chest tightened. She hadn't meant to end up here, but somehow she had. She stood for a long time, staring at the door, her hand trembling at her side. She remembered the ledger, the name etched darkly against the page, Kate Morgan. Before she could think better of it, she reached for the doorknob. It turned beneath her fingers, not locked. She froze her breath, caught in her throat. The silence behind the door felt alive, waiting. She pushed it open. The room was dim curtains drawn against the daylight. The air was stale but perfumed faintly, the unmistakable sweetness of roses lingering within. A narrow bed pressed against the wall, its quilt neatly folded. A dressing table stood opposite a tarnished mirror hanging above it. Everything was orderly, undisturbed, and yet it felt as though someone had only just stepped out. Her gaze fell to the dressing table where a single object rested. A small black comb, the kind once used to hold a woman's hair in place. It gleamed faintly in the half-light, untouched by dust, as though waiting for someone to return. Nora reached out her fingers, hovering just above it. The air thickened, her heart hammering. She pulled her hand back, unwilling to touch it. The moment she did, the mirror above the table seemed to cloud over mist seeping across its surface. Slowly, faintly, an image began to form. The reflection was not her own. A woman stood there, her veil lifted enough to reveal hollow eyes, her lips curved downward in sorrow. Her mouth moved, though no sound came. Nora stumbled back, striking the edge of the bed, her body rigid with terror. And then the whisper reached her not from the mirror, but from every corner of the room at once. Soft, insistent, almost tender. "Stay." The air pressed close, heavy, with roses wrapping around her like a shroud. The mirror cleared, leaving only her pale, trembling face staring back. She fled then out into the hallway, her breath shallow and frantic. The door closed behind her with a soft click, almost gentle, as though the room itself had no need to rush. It had already planted what it wanted within her. Back in her own room, Nora collapsed against the desk, pen clattering to the floor. Her journal lay open, the blank page staring up at her. She grabbed it with desperate hands, scrawling across the paper with frantic urgency. "Kate Morgan is here. Room 3327. She knows me now." The words blurred as her hand shook the ink, smudging under her palm. She sat in silence afterward, her ears ringing her body, trembling with the knowledge that she was not merely a guest anymore. She had been chosen, marked by the echo of someone long dead, and when she set down the pen at last, the roses lingered stronger than ever, as though unseen hands had already placed them at her side. The day stretched on in uneasy fragments, time slipping strangely in Nora's perception. Breakfast was a blur. She could not recall what she ate, or even if she had eaten at all. The lobby, with its cheerful movement of guests, felt staged, a fragile performance, meant to cover the cracks in the walls. Each laugh she heard sounded hollow, each footstep strangely delayed, as if the hotel itself dictated the rhythm. By late afternoon, Nora wandered outside to the grounds, desperate for fresh air. The Pacific lay vast and blue, its surface glittering in the weak sunlight. Families strolled along the sand, children's voices carrying across the breeze. The normalcy of it all seemed almost cruel. She walked further from the crowd, closer to the hotel's rear lawn, where the cliffs broke away into stone steps, leading down to the tide pools. It was there she thought she saw her again. The woman in black stood at the edge of the rocks, the hem of her dress brushing against the tide. Her veil stirred faintly in the wind, though her form remained unnaturally still. Nora froze, heart thudding. When she blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only the wet stone slick with foam. But the scent of roses rolled in on the salt wind too, out of place, too deliberate. When she returned inside, the evening sun slanting through stained glass windows, she felt it immediately. The hotel had shifted. It was subtle, like walking into a room where a conversation had just ended. The walls seemed to press closer, the carpets darker, the chandeliers swaying ever so slightly as though unsettled by a breath no one else felt. She tried again to distract herself in the library. Pulling another ledger from the shelves, she flipped to a section of brittle yellowed pages, nearly illegible from age. But halfway down the page, she froze. A line had been drawn through an entry, not the careful script of a clerk, but a jagged, angry mark, as though scored with violence. Beneath it, faintly visible still, was the name Kate Morgan. Her throat tightened. Someone had tried to erase her, to blot her out of the record, but even that had failed. The library dimmed around her shadows, lengthening unnaturally quickly. She closed the book with a sharp clap, returning it hastily to the shelf, her hands trembling. The moment she stepped back into the hall, the chandeliers above flickered once-twice before steadying again. The air hummed faintly like static brushing across her skin. That night, she tried to resist sleep, though exhaustion pressed heavily against her. She left every lamp burning her journal open beside her. But when she finally drifted off, the dreams came immediately. She was back in the corridor outside room 3327. The carpet stretched endlessly in both directions, lamps flickering as though with the rhythm of her heart. At the far end stood the woman in black, waiting. Her veil shimmered faintly, revealing pale skin beneath. This time, Nora felt her feet moving of their own accord. She tried to resist, but each step drew her closer. Her body pulled as though by invisible strings. The woman raised her hand slowly, and the veil lifted just enough for Nora to see eyes dark hollow, filled with a sorrow so immense it seemed bottomless. "Stay," the woman whispered, her voice filling the entire corridor, vibrating against the walls. Nora gasped awake, her chest heaving. Every lamp in the room had gone dark. Only the faint glow of the moon filtered through the curtains, casting silver across the floor. She scrambled to relight one of the lamps, her hands shaking as the flame caught. The moment the room brightened, she froze. The black comb she had seen in room 3327 now rested on her desk, placed carefully beside her journal. Her stomach dropped, her mind reeling. She hadn't touched it, hadn't carried it here. Yet there it was, gleaming faintly in the lamplight, as though it had always belonged to her. And beneath it, scrawled in her journal in handwriting, not her own, were two words: "For you." Her breath caught terror, and something darker coiling together inside her chest. The room was silent, yet she felt the presence pressing close, unseen, but undeniable. The roses bloomed in the air once more, heavy, intoxicating, and though she wanted to scream, she could not. For deep down, some part of her already understood. She was no longer merely witnessing the haunting of the Hotel del Coronado. She was becoming part of it. The night felt endless. Nora sat rigid at her desk, staring at the black comb glinting faintly in the lamplight. The words in her journal, "For you," pulled at her chest as though they carried weight beyond ink. The perfume of roses grew oppressive, clinging to her lungs, making each breath shallow. She reached for the comb, once her fingers trembling, then recoiled. But the thing remained, silent, patient. When morning finally came, the light filtering through the curtains seemed pale, drained of warmth. Nora dressed quickly, her eyes never leaving the comb. She considered taking it downstairs, handing it to the staff, perhaps even discarding it. Yet some instinct stopped her. A strange dread whispered that if she removed it, something worse might follow. In the lobby, she watched the other guests, their chatter bright and careless, their lives untouched. How could they not feel it? The weight, the eyes, the soft pull of something unseen. She envied them their ignorance, though a part of her wondered if perhaps they simply chose not to notice. That afternoon, she sought out the front desk. The clerk on duty was a middle-aged man with a neat mustache, his demeanor crisp and rehearsed. Nora hesitated, then leaned forward. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Do you know anything about room 3327? The man's smile faltered his posture, stiffening slightly. "Why do you ask?" "I found some old ledgers in the library. A name. Kate Morgan." She kept her voice low, cautious. Was she a guest here?" The clerk's eyes flickered, then dropped to the papers before him. "I'm afraid I don't have much information, miss. Some say a woman stayed in that room, yes. Others say she never checked in at all." A story, really. The sort guests like to whisper. He cleared his throat and forced a polite smile. It's not an official record, but Nora heard the hesitation, the careful evasion. She recognized it. He knew more than he would admit. That evening, she lingered in the hotel's long, dim corridors. The gas lamps along the wall sputtered faintly, their light casting strange angles across the wallpaper. She passed one of the maids, the same pale woman she had seen before her cart rattling softly. Nora almost stopped her, but the maid's eyes met hers first. She's lonely, the maid said without prompting, her voice quiet but firm. Nora's breath caught. Who? The maid tilted her head slightly toward the far end of the corridor where the shadows gathered thickly. The woman you've seen. She doesn't want to frighten. She only wants what she lost. Before Nora could ask more, the maid pushed her cart on her figure, swallowed into the dim light. That night the dream returned. Nora stood again in the corridor of the third floor, the lamps flickering low. This time, the door to room 3327 stood open, a thin strip of darkness yawning beyond. The woman in black lingered within her form, just visible in the shadows. She lifted a hand, beckoning slowly. Nora felt her body move forward, each step soft against the carpet. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow, but the pull was irresistible. She reached the doorway and peered inside. The room was the same as before, the dressing table, the narrow bed, but darker, filled with a heavy silence. The woman turned slightly enough for the veil to shift. Her lips parted, her voice a faint echo that filled the room. Stay with me, please. The sorrow in the words pierced deeper than fear. It was not anger, not malice. It was longing, desperate and endless. Nora woke, gasping, clutching the sheets with trembling hands. The lamps in her room flickered weakly as though stirred by her breath. On the desk, the comb still lay waiting, but now beside it rested something new. A single dried rose, its petals blackened at the edges, its stem brittle as bone. Her throat tightened. She had not brought it. She had not opened the window. And yet it was there. The message was clear. Kate Morgan was no longer only haunting the halls of the Hotel del Coronado. She was haunting Nora. The rose lay brittle and fragile on her desk, and yet its presence filled the room as if it were a monument. Nora stared at it for a long time, her breath uneven. The comb and the rose token's offerings were no longer echoes of the past. They were gifts, chosen, placed deliberately. Sleep would not return after that. Nora dressed and descended to the veranda where the faint stir of dawn pressed against the horizon. Guests were already gathering, sipping coffee and murmuring, oblivious to the storm building in the walls of the hotel. She tried to ground herself in their laughter, in the hum of morning life, but her eyes kept drifting to the upper floors, where shadows clung like vines. Later that day, she found herself again in the library. The ledgers and guest books seemed to breathe around her, their bindings groaning softly, as though eager to be opened. She pulled down one of the thickest volumes, its leather cover cracked its spine loose. She flipped through with nervous fingers until she stopped on a page that seemed strangely fresh compared to the rest. The ink was not faded. It gleamed dark and wet as if written moments ago. The entry read simply, Kate Morgan Room, 3327. Beneath it, another line had been added, Nora Whitfield Room, 3327. Her stomach lurched. Her name stared up at her in that same dark ink, though she had not written it. Her hands shook as she touched the page, smudging the wet lines. She stumbled back the ledger, falling shut with a heavy thud. That evening, unable to resist, Nora climbed again to the third floor. The corridor stretched silent, the lamps humming softly, the air tinged with roses. She walked slowly each step, muffled against the carpet, until she reached the warped door of room 3327. It stood slightly ajar. Her throat tightened. She had closed it last time. She was sure of it. But now the gap yawned open thin as a smile dark as the sea at night. She pushed the door wider, the hinges groaning softly. The air inside was cooler, heavy with that same floral sweetness. The dressing table gleamed faintly, the comb still in its place. And now, beside the mirror, a photograph leaned against the glass. It was an old portrait, sepia-toned, of a young woman. Her features were delicate, her hair pinned neatly, her eyes shadowed with a sorrow that seemed to seep through the years. Nora knew without being told Kate Morgan, her gaze locked onto the eyes in the photograph. For a fleeting moment, they seemed to move, to widen, as though recognizing her. Behind her, the door clicked softly shut. The air thickened. The mirror clouded again, mist spiraling across its surface. A handprint formed from within the glass, pale and thin, pressing outward. Nora stumbled back against the bed, her heart pounding. The whisper rose again, soft, almost pleading. "Stay." The roses swelled in the air, choking sweet to the point of nausea. The mirror cleared, and Kate's face lingered there, faint but unmistakable. Tears glistened at the corners of the spectral eyes. "You look like her," Kate murmured, her voice low, threaded with sorrow. Nora's breath caught. Her who did she mean? Before she could answer, the image faded, leaving only her own trembling reflection. The photograph slid slowly off the dressing table, falling face down on the carpet. Nora fled the room, her footsteps echoing down the corridor, the word "stay" trailing after her like a shadow. When she reached her own room, she collapsed into the chair chest, heaving. On the desk, the rose and comb remained. But now, lying across the open page of her journal, was the photograph she had left behind in room 3327, and scrawled beneath it in the same unfamiliar hand were 4 words. "You belong with me." Nora sat frozen before her desk, staring at the photograph resting atop her journal. The 4 words scrawled beneath it, "You belong with me," seemed to thrum faintly, as though they were alive, resonating with the beating of her own heart. Her skin prickled with cold, despite the heavy air of the room. She tried to steady herself, to think rationally. Perhaps someone in the hotel staff had access to her room. Perhaps it was all some cruel prank. But no explanation held. The objects appeared too carefully chosen, too intimately placed. No stranger would have known where to leave them, or how to lace them so seamlessly with her dreams. That night, she could not bring herself to blow out the lamps. Their light flickered weakly against the corners, pushing back only some of the darkness. She kept the comb, the rose, and the photograph together, arranged neatly, as though by accepting them, she could somehow lessen their threat. Yet the whispers came again, low and insistent. Nora's head jerked up at the faint creak of her door. Slowly the knob turned, though no hand touched it. The door eased open an inch, then another, as though someone were pushing it from the hall. She rose with trembling legs and hurried forward, slamming it shut. The latch clicked in place, but almost immediately she felt pressure on the other side, a slow, dragging weight against the wood. She backed away, her pulse racing until the sound stopped. Silence reclaimed the room. Sleep took her eventually, but only in ragged fragments. She dreamed of the sea pounding the cliffs below, the hotel waves rising higher and higher until they swallowed the veranda whole. She stood at the shoreline, and beside her stood Kate, her veil trailing her pale hands clasped around Nora's wrist. The pull was strong, stronger than the tide, dragging her forward into the black water. When Nora woke, her wrist ached as though gripped too tightly. A faint mark lingered there, no bruise, but a pale ring chilling in its perfection. The following day, her nerves frayed thin. Nora wandered again into the library, desperate for something, answers, warnings, anything. She combed through local history's news articles, the brittle edges of archived newspapers. It was in a folded clipping tucked into the back of a book that she found it November 1892. the mysterious death of Kate Morgan believed to have taken her own life at the Hotel del Coronado. A revolver found near her body, but the article went on unsettling in its detail. Witnesses reported that she had been seen walking the halls only hours after her death. Guests complained of roses blooming in their rooms, of combs and ribbons misplaced. Some swore they heard her whispering at night, calling softly for someone unnamed. Nora's chest tightened as she read. This was not simply a legend retold. The haunting had been immediate, unbroken since the moment of her death. She folded the clipping into her pocket and left the library. The corridors felt heavier, the walls watching. Guests passed her with distracted smiles, but their faces blurred as if they were not truly there. All Nora could feel was the weight of Kate Morgan's gaze, the quiet pressure that had begun to anchor itself deep inside her. By evening, she no longer resisted the pull to the third floor. She climbed slowly, the lamps flickering, the scent of roses rising to meet her. Room 3327 waited with its door open wide like a mouth. Inside, the air pressed cool against her skin. The mirror was clear this time, reflecting her pale face, her hollow eyes. On the bed, neatly arranged, lay a black dress old-fashioned in cut, the fabric thin with age, yet carefully pressed. Her throat tightened. The dress was waiting. On the dressing table, her journal lay open, though she had left it behind in her own room. New words filled the page, written in that same hand. You wear her sorrow well. The gas lamp sputtered. Nora felt her knees weaken. The air thickened, heavy with roses, and in the mirror behind her reflection, Kate appeared, veil lifted just enough to reveal her lips curving into the faintest, saddest smile. Stay, the voice came again, closer now, almost inside her own thoughts. And as Nora stood trembling in the dim room, her hand rose slowly, almost against her will. Reaching toward the dress laid across the bed, Nora's fingers brushed the fabric of the black dress. It was softer than she expected, though the cloth looked worn as if it had endured countless seasons. The weight of history clung to it. She could almost feel the body that once filled its shape. A sharp chill slid up her arm at the contact, and she pulled back, her heart thudding. But the whisper pressed closer, winding through the air like a lullaby. Stay. Her breath quickened. No, she murmured aloud, though her voice trembled weak against the silence. The mirror shimmered again, its surface dimming as though lit from behind by some unseen flame. Kate appeared, her veil floating lightly as though moved by a breeze that did not exist. Her eyes fixed on Nora, wide with longing, glistening with the kind of grief that could rot through centuries. You look like her. The ghost repeated, clearer now, the words brushing Nora's skin like fingertips. Who, Nora asked before she could stop herself, her own voice breaking the silence in a way that made her flinch. Kate tilted her head, her expression softening. The one I waited for. The one who never came. The image flickered, wavering, then leaned forward in the mirror until it almost pressed against Nora's own reflection. She stepped back, but the glass seemed to lean with her. Suddenly the lamp blew out, plunging the room into thick, oppressive shadow. The darkness swallowed everything except the faint outline of the bed and the dress. Somewhere in that suffocating blackness, footsteps moved, slow, deliberate, circling her. Nora clutched the journal against her chest. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears, but over it came the steady rustle of fabric, the soft sound of a skirt brushing the carpet. Then cool fingers brushed her hair. Nora gasped and spun, but there was nothing. Nothing but the smell of roses blooming so thick they seemed to choke the air. The darkness pressed tighter. Then faintly, she felt the shape of a hand sliding into hers, its grip light, but undeniable. She froze. It was colder than ice, but the pressure was steady, anchoring her in place. The voice was right beside her ear now. You belong here, with me. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. Instead, she stumbled backward, wrenching her hand free, colliding with the bed. Her knees buckled and she fell onto the mattress. The dress crumpled beneath her weight, releasing a cloud of dust, though the fabric itself felt oddly warm, as though it had only just been worn. In the faint glow from the window, the mirror flared again. Kate's face filled it larger now, clearer. Her sorrow edged with something sharper: need, desperation, hunger. Nora staggered to her feet, rushed to the door, and twisted the knob. It stuck. She yanked harder, her breath ragged, her palms slick. The door would not move. Behind her, the rustle of fabric grew louder, coming closer, as if someone invisible was stepping across the room. The air pressed cold against her back. Her journal slipped from her grip, falling open on the floor. The pages fluttered violently, as if caught in an unseen wind, before stopping on a fresh line written across the paper. "We are not finished." The door burst open at last, slamming against the wall. Nora stumbled into the corridor, gasping, her legs barely holding her. She fled down the hallway, past the flickering lamps, past the long shadows that seemed to twist and follow. When she reached her own room, she slammed the door shut, locking it tight. She pressed her back against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Her hands still trembled, her wrist still burned faintly from the ghostly grip. On her bedside table lay the rose, the comb, and now, impossibly, the black dress she had left behind in room 3327, laid neatly across the chair as if waiting for her. And in the mirror above the dressing table, her reflection was no longer her own. It was Kate's. Nora froze, every muscle in her body locking tight as her gaze fixed on the mirror. The face staring back was not hers. It was Kate's delicate features framed by dark hair, lips curved in the faintest mournful smile. Only the eyes betrayed something different. They followed her with intent, as though measuring whether she would finally surrender. Her breath grew shallow. She lifted a trembling hand and waved it before her face. The reflection did not mimic her movement. Kate's image lingered steady, separate, as though the glass had become a window. The lamp flickered, dimming the room. Shadows reached from the corners, stretching long and grasping, until only the glow of the mirror remained. Nora pushed herself to her feet, every step leaden, and crept closer to the glass. Her reflection did not return. Instead, Kate leaned nearer, her eyes widening sorrow, deepening into something darker. "You're already mine," she whispered, voice low, as though spoken inside Nora's own mind. Nora flinched and staggered back, colliding with the chair. The black dress shifted where it lay, folding slightly as though an unseen hand had brushed across it. She snatched the journal from the desk, clutching it tight. She thought of leaving, of packing her bags and fleeing the hotel entirely. Yet the thought brought little relief. The tether had already been tied, and deep within her she knew it was not as simple as walking away. Her eyes fell on the journal. The last line, "We are not finished," still gleamed faintly ink-wet, though she had not written it. Her chest ached with a heaviness that made her sit down, pressing her palm against her heart. She tried to steady her breath, to anchor herself in reality, but the room continued to bend around her. The faint scent of roses thickened again, clinging to the air. She closed her eyes. For a moment, silence. Then the knock came, a slow, deliberate rapping at her door. 3 times, her blood ran cold. She remained still, unwilling to answer, unwilling even to breathe too loudly. The knock came again, louder this time, rattling the latch. Her legs refused to move, but her eyes darted toward the door. The shadows under the frame shifted, darkened, as though someone were standing just beyond it. Another knock, sharper, now reverberating through the wood. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Who's there?" For a moment, silence. Then very softly, a woman's voice, "Your room is ready." The latch trembled. Slowly, deliberately it turned. Nora scrambled back, pressing herself against the far wall. She clutched the journal to her chest, as though it could shield her. The door opened inch by inch, and the scent of roses rushed in thick, sweet, suffocating. But no one stood in the doorway. The hall beyond stretched empty, silent, bathed in the faint hum of lamps. She dared one step forward, her body shaking. She peered into the corridor. Nothing. Just silence. When she turned back into her room, her breath caught. The dress was gone from the chair, and the mirror was once again filled not with her face, not even with Kate's entirely, but with both overlaid, blurred together, until she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "This isn't real." But the reflection's lips curved upward, speaking the words for her. "It is." Nora staggered backward, heart pounding, as the mirror pulsed with that unholy doubling of faces, hers and Kate's, stitched together like an unfinished portrait. The reflection smiled, though her own lips did not move. The sensation was disorienting, nauseating, as if the glass itself were trying to claim her identity. The air grew colder, so cold her breath misted faintly before her. The lamps dimmed, then flared, then sputtered into uneasy flickers, their glow unable to anchor the room in the present. She stumbled toward the window, desperate for air, for some tether to the world outside. The glass panes rattled beneath her palms as she pressed them open. The sea wind surged in damp and sharp with salt. The distant sound of waves breaking against the shore rose like a heartbeat in the night. For a fleeting second she believed the open window would break the spell. But then, in the reflection of the window glass, Kate stood behind her. Her veil drifted around her shoulders, her hands folded in front of her. Not threatening, but waiting. Always waiting. Nora turned sharply, but the room was empty. Only the faint rustle of unseen fabric lingered, brushing against her ears like a memory. Her knees buckled. She sank into the chair where the dress had been, staring at the empty seat cushion as if it could offer reason. But reason felt far away. Her journal slipped open in her lap. More words had been written, the ink still glistening, though her hands had not moved the pen. She waited, and he never came. Do not leave her waiting, too. Nora's chest tightened. A sob threatened to escape, but she pressed it down, terrified of making a sound in case it drew the presence closer. She rose, carrying the journal with her, and forced herself to the hallway. Perhaps she thought if she walked among the living, she could shake the grip of the dead. The corridor stretched endlessly, lamps casting uneven shadows. A couple strolled by, whispering softly, their presence strangely blurred like a scene fading from memory. Nora blinked hard. Were they real? She could not tell. She descended the grand staircase, the ornate railings cold beneath her fingers. The lobby was still alive with the quiet bustle of staff and late-night guests, though their voices sounded muffled as though heard through water. She spotted a familiar figure, the old librarian she had spoken with days before, his arms laden with books. Compelled by desperation, she approached him. "Please," she whispered, "tell me about Kate Morgan. Tell me everything." The man paused, his cloudy eyes studying her with surprising clarity. Slowly, he set the books upon a side table. "Some stories," he said gently, "are not read. They are lived. And once you step into them, you cannot always step back out." Her throat tightened. "But she's here. With me. She won't let go." The librarian's lips pressed into a thin line. He lifted a finger, pointing upward toward the floors above. "She never left the room she was given. She never left the waiting. The longer you stay, the less of yourself you will carry away. Be careful, child." His words struck something inside her, a truth she had already begun to feel. She nodded numbly, clutching the journal close. When she looked back up, the librarian was gone. The books sat neatly stacked, but he had vanished entirely, as though he had never been there at all. The lobby spun faintly. Nora pressed her hand against the cool marble counter, grounding herself. From behind, a voice drifted soft and close just by her ear. "Your room is ready." She spun around, heart seizing. No one stood there. But when she turned back to the staircase, the faint shape of a woman in black ascended slowly, veil trailing, never looking back. And without meaning to, Nora found her feet carrying her upward, once more following. The staircase seemed longer than before, every step stretching out like a passage into another realm. Nora's hand slid along the railing, its polished wood strangely cold, as though frost had crept beneath her palm. The faint figure ahead moved with deliberate grace, never faltering, her veil trailing like mist behind her. Nora's chest ached with the weight of the pull. Part of her screamed to turn back, to flee out the front doors and never look at the hotel again. Yet her legs climbed steadily as if commanded by a will not her own. The second floor opened before her, a hushed corridor lined with doors that all looked the same. The figure glided past them, pausing at intervals as though checking, searching. Nora followed every breath, a tremor in her chest. Finally, the woman stopped before a single door, room 3327. She lingered, her head turning just enough for the veil to shift. Through the sheer fabric, Nora glimpsed pale skin, a hollowed cheek, lips pressed in sorrow. The door creaked opening without a hand to push it. The figure drifted inside. Nora hesitated at the threshold, gripping her journal so tightly her knuckles burned white. She wanted to run, but she knew running wouldn't release her. The tether was already too tight. She stepped inside. The air in the room was heavier than before, thick with the scent of roses, and something metallic beneath it, like rust, like dried blood. The furniture seemed darker, more worn. The wallpaper faded to the hue of old bruises. The black dress was back on the bed, smoothed perfectly as though awaiting her, and Kate stood by the mirror. Her veil no longer shielded her face. Pale, luminous eyes stared directly at Nora. Her lips curved into a mournful half-smile, though the sorrow behind it felt endless. "You came," Kate whispered. Her voice was stronger now, carrying through the air, instead of curling within Nora's mind. "You didn't leave me waiting." Nora's throat was dry, but she managed to speak. "Why me? What do you want from me?" Kate tilted her head. The motion was delicate, almost childlike. "I want what was promised. To be seen, to be held, to not be forgotten." Her gaze drifted toward the dress on the bed. "Put it on." The words were not a request. They were soft but sharp as a commandment. Nora shook her head, retreating a step. "No, I'm not you. I'm not." The room shuddered. The lamps flickered violently, plunging everything into brief flashes of black and gold. The mirror warped its surface, rippling like water, and in its depths, Nora saw herself already dressed in the gown veil, shadowing her face. Kate's whisper pressed close again. "You already belong to me." The journal in Nora's hand flared with heat. She dropped it, pages fanning open on the floor. New words crawled across them, ink spilling as though the page bled. "Wear it and she will rest. Refuse and she will never let you go." The black dress stirred on the bed, its sleeves lifting faintly, fabric swaying as though arms invisible waited inside. The veil floated upward as if breathing. Nora's knees trembled. Her body screamed to run, yet the air grew thick, the doorway behind her shrinking into shadow. Kate stepped closer, extending her hand. The sorrow in her face deepened into something that looked almost tender. "Be me," she whispered. "Be what I could not." Nora's breath came fast and shallow. The dress rustled louder, shifting as if preparing itself to be worn, and she knew she had no choice but to decide: accept the dress, or resist the grasp of a ghost who would never release her. The dress swayed gently, as though stirred by a phantom breeze, its sleeves reaching toward Nora with the patience of something that had waited too long. The veil hovered inches above the bedspread. The air beneath it, thick with the smell of roses, turned bitter, cloying. Nora's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to run, but her feet felt locked in place, rooted to the carpet. Kate's gaze bore into her, not cruel, but heavy with expectation. "Be me the ghost," whispered again, her tone soft but threaded with steel. Nora forced her voice through trembling lips. "I can't. I'm not you." Kate tilted her head, a sad smile curling at the edges of her mouth. "You're close enough." The lamps flickered violently, plunging the room into alternating bursts of light and shadow. Each flicker distorted the mirror, and in every flash Nora saw herself dressed in the black gown, veiled, her eyes hollow. In the next flicker, she was herself again, terrified and trembling. The two images fought over her reflection like hands tugging at a rope stretched too tight. Her journal lay open on the floor. More words bled across the page in frantic strokes as though written in desperation by an unseen hand. If she wears it, she rests. If she resists, she binds. Nora's chest heaved. She crouched, reaching for the journal, but the instant her fingertips brushed the page, the dress rose higher, the fabric filling out as though a body already occupied it. Sleeves stretched, waistline tightened, the veil floated toward her face. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed along the edges of the mirror, spreading outward like veins. Nora's breath clouded in front of her, and her body shook violently, more from dread than cold. Kate extended her hand again, her voice now a chorus of whispers layered upon one another. "End it for me. End the waiting. Wear it." Nora staggered back, pressing against the wall. Her nails dug into the plaster as though to anchor herself, but the wall seemed to pulse beneath her hands, alive with a heartbeat that was not her own. Her voice cracked. "And if I refuse?" Kate's expression changed. The tenderness collapsed into something raw, desperate, vengeful. Her eyes darkened, her mouth opened, and from her throat poured a sound like the wail of 1,000 storms. The lamps exploded glass raining onto the carpet. The veil snapped upward, soaring like a predator striking. The room convulsed. The floorboards groaned beneath Nora's feet. The wallpaper peeled in strips, roses blooming and rotting in the same instant across its surface. The veil descended, brushing against Nora's cheek. It was so cold it burned. Nora screamed, ducking away, her body colliding with the mirror. It rippled, swallowing her reflection. For a moment, her own face vanished, entirely replaced by Kate smiling with the serenity of someone who had finally found her vessel. Nora dropped to her knees. Her hands closed around the journal again, clutching it like a lifeline. Her lips moved without thinking, whispering words scrawled across the page, words she did not remember writing. "Not mine, not yet, not ever." The mirror cracked. A jagged line split Kate's face in two. The dress fell limply to the floor, fabric collapsing lifeless once more. The veil drifted down, settling at Nora's feet. Kate's form wavered, flickering, her edges unraveling into shadow. But her voice lingered softer now, a breath against Nora's ear. "You cannot leave me behind." Then the room fell still. The silence was heavier than sound. Nora collapsed forward, trembling, gasping for air. The dress lay inert, but the scent of roses clung to her skin, inescapable. When she lifted her eyes to the mirror, her reflection had returned. But it smiled a moment too late. Nora's breath rattled in her chest as she stared at the mirror. Her reflection stood perfectly still, yet when she blinked, it didn't blink back. Its lips curled upward, slow and deliberate, as though savoring her terror. Her knees dug into the carpet. The journal felt hot against her palms, words bleeding faintly through the cover, as though it were alive and waiting to be opened again. She dared not. The mirror face tilted its head, eyes narrowing. Then, without sound, it stepped forward inside the glass, but closer than it had been before. Nora staggered back until her spine hit the bed frame. "No," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, childlike. "You're not me. You're not." The reflection's smile widened, but it spoke no words this time. It only lifted a hand, pressing it against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled around it like water. Nora scrambled to her feet, tearing her gaze away. Her entire body shook, but she forced herself to move, to cross the room and throw open the door. The hallway yawned before her, unnaturally quiet. The buzz of the lamps was gone, replaced by silence so complete it made her ears ache. She stepped into the corridor, leaving the mirror, the dress, the veil behind. yet she could still feel them like they lingered just inches from her back. The door shut behind her with a muffled click. The hallway stretched long and dim. The wallpaper here bore roses too, but they seemed darker, their outlines blurred as though painted by a fading hand. She walked quickly, then faster, until her steps nearly broke into a run. At the far end of the corridor, a woman appeared. Nora froze. The woman wore black, her veil trailing down her shoulders. But her walk was strange, jerky, uneven, as if each step had to be forced from bones that no longer worked right. She came closer, the sound of her heels echoing hollowly against the floorboards. Nora turned, intending to flee back the way she came, only to see another figure emerging there too. Same veil, same black gown, face hidden. Her heart slammed in her chest. She stumbled toward a side door, wrenching the handle. It swung open to reveal another hallway. Inside, more women in veils stood silently, their heads turning in unison toward her. Nora stumbled back, pressing against the wall. They did not move closer, but their presence was suffocating. She bolted, pushing through another door. It opened into the lobby. For a moment, she thought she had escaped. Voices murmured, staff bustled, lamps glowed warm. But the guests were wrong. Their faces were blurred features, smudged as though erased. Their mouths opened and closed without sound, their laughter echoing faintly distorted. She spun in place, breath ragged. The chandelier above creaked, swaying as though disturbed by a wind that had not touched her. Shadows pooled across the marble floor, stretching long, winding like grasping arms. The journal throbbed in her hands, demanding her attention. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The pages shifted on their own, landing on fresh words. The hotel is hers now. Every hall, every face. And soon you too. Nora slammed it shut. A whisper threaded through the lobby air, soft but clear enough to freeze her blood. Your room is ready. Her head snapped up. Behind the front desk, the clerk stood as still as a mannequin. His eyes were empty voids. His mouth stretched into a sharp smile. He extended a hand toward her, gesturing back up the grand staircase. Every face in the lobby turned toward her as one, and all at once they began to rise from their seats. The sound of chairs scraping echoed like thunder as the faceless guests rose in unison. Their movements were jerky, puppet-like, as though something unseen pulled their strings. One by one, they turned their heads toward Nora, their blurred features twitching in the glow of the chandelier. Her pulse roared in her ears. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the polished marble floor. The clerk's voice slithered across the room again, slow and deliberate. Your room is ready. He beckoned once more toward the grand staircase, his hand pale and stiff, his smile splitting too wide across his face. Nora shook her head violently, clutching the journal to her chest. No, she whispered, though her voice cracked like glass. I'm not going back there. The faceless crowd began to move. Their steps were synchronized, an eerie shuffle that filled the vast lobby with an unnatural rhythm. Their feet barely lifted from the ground, dragging across the marble, leaving faint smears behind, as though the hotel itself was bleeding through them. She spun toward the great doors, the ones that opened to the cool ocean air and freedom. Her breath hitched with desperate hope if she could just reach them. But the doors would not move. She grasped the handles, pulling with all her strength, her nails scraping against the polished brass. The metal burned cold under her skin. No matter how hard she pulled, they stayed locked, fused, as though they had never been meant to open at all. Her reflection shone in the glass panes of the doors. At first, it was only her. But then the image shifted, flickering, until Kate stood in her place, veiled and waiting. Nora staggered back, nearly colliding with one of the faceless guests. Their head tilted unnaturally close, the blur of their face trembling like wet paint. A faint hum escaped their mouths, not words, but something low and droning that rattled against her bones. The sound spread through the lobby, a chorus. low rising, filling the air until it drowned out even the pounding of her heart. Nora pressed her palms over her ears, but it seeped through her skin, filling her veins. The world tilted sideways. The journal in her hands flared again, pages flipping violently. Ink poured onto the paper, words forming through frantic scratches. There is no outside, only the room, only her. Her breath tore in shallow gasps. She dropped the journal, the sound of it hitting the marble, echoing unnaturally loud. The crowd halted. Every faceless head turned down toward the book. The clerk's voice sharpened louder this time. "Pick it up. It belongs to you." Nora shook her head, taking another step back. The crowd surged forward in unison, their blurred mouths opening in a silent scream. The chandelier rattled above crystals, trembling. Shadows stretched, rising from the corners, climbing the walls like liquid darkness. Nora turned and fled, not up the stairs, not toward the doors, but through a side hallway, her shoes striking the floor in frantic rhythm. She didn't know where it led, only that it was away. The humming followed her, seeping through every wall. The lamps flickered overhead, casting uneven bursts of light as the wallpaper's roses bloomed and withered in endless cycles. Her lungs burned, but she ran until the corridor seemed to fold around her, spiraling, pulling her deeper into the hotel's heart. At last, she stumbled into another room. It was small, narrow, and cold. A single lamp burned on a nightstand. The bedspread was covered in dust, untouched, but on the bed lay a single object, the black veil, folded, carefully waiting, and the mirror on the wall showed her already wearing it. The mirror's glow pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Nora stood frozen in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. On the bed, the veil was folded with reverence edges, sharp, as though it had never been touched. But in the mirror, her reflection already wore it. The gauzy black fabric draped across her hair, trailing over her shoulders, her eyes hollowed by shadow, her chest tightened. She blinked hard once, twice. The veil remained on her reflection. A slow, deliberate movement, her mirror self lifted its hands and adjusted it, smoothing it across her head, with a gesture that was unmistakably her own, though she hadn't moved. Nora stumbled back until her spine pressed against the cold frame of the door. Her legs quivered, torn between bolting and collapsing. The humming had quieted. The silence that filled the air now was worse. She forced her gaze away from the mirror, focusing on the bed. The veil lay still, harmless, nothing but fabric, but it felt alive. The air around it pulsed, each beat pulling at her like a current, urging her closer. Her whisper was hoarse. "You won't trick me." But the journal still clutched in her hand. Without her remembering, picking it up again, shivered violently. Pages flared open, stopping at a blank sheet. Ink seeped up from nowhere, writing itself in careful script. "You are already wearing it. Why fight the truth?" Nora slammed the book shut, pressing it against her chest as though it might shield her. Her heartbeat thundered loud enough to fill the room. The mirror image tilted its head, studying her with a faint smile. Slowly, the reflection lifted its veil, with both hands pulling it free. The fabric shimmered as it came off. Her reflection lowered it, then let it fall straight through the glass. The veil landed silently at Nora's feet. She screamed, kicking it back, but it only slid farther across the dusty floor, circling as though carried by unseen hands. It settled near the door again, blocking her way out. The reflection in the mirror now stood bareheaded, but her hair was darker, her skin paler, and her smile wrong. Not hers. Kate's. The whisper unfurled through the room like smoke. "At last, you see." Nora's hands shook. She dropped the journal, the thud echoing too loud. Her gaze darted to the window, small, narrow, the only possible escape. She lunged for it, fingers clawing at the latch. The wood creaked as she forced it open. Cool night air rushed in, bringing the faint smell of the ocean. For one wild moment, hope surged through her chest. She could climb out, find the beach, run, until the hotel was nothing but a shadow behind her. But as she leaned out, the sight that greeted her stopped her blood cold. The beach was gone. Instead, endless hallways stretched outward, spiraling in impossible directions. Windows led not to sky or ocean, but to more rooms, more doors, all repeating in infinite patterns. Guests wandered them, silently veiled and faceless. Some looked up at her, though they had no eyes. Her breath faltered. No. The whisper returned closer now, pressed against her ear. There is no outside. There never was. The window slammed shut on its own, nearly catching her hands. She spun back to the room. The veil was no longer at her feet. It was in her hands. Her fingers gripped the fabric tight, as though they had been holding it all along. And she realized with sickening dread that the mirror now showed her lowering it over her head again, slowly, inevitably, while her real body stood trembling, refusing to move. Yet her arms began to rise. Her arms lifted against her will, as if invisible strings had woven themselves into her muscles. The veil hung heavy, its fabric whispering as it unfolded, brushing across her trembling fingers. Nora's breath came ragged, her body fighting a battle it was destined to lose. "No! No!" she cried, shaking her head violently, her whole body straining backward. But her reflection didn't resist. In the mirror, she moved with serene certainty, lowering the veil gracefully over her head, the black fabric swallowing her face until only darkness remained. The moment the veil in her hands brushed her forehead, the room shifted. The lamp flickered, dimmed, and then flared with a sickly yellow glow. The wallpaper's roses seemed to breathe, curling open, wilting, then blooming again in grotesque repetition. The journal on the floor snapped open with a loud crack. Pages flurried, stopping on one line scrawled in crimson. If she wears it, she becomes the bride. If she resists, she becomes the ghost. Nora's knees buckled. Her vision swam her reflection, hidden now beneath the veil. The face behind it was not hers. Kate's pale, hollow visage peered back, smiling with lips too sharp. Her whisper clawed through the air, curling around Nora's ear. "Be still. It's easier if you don't fight." No, Nora screamed, flinging the veil away with every ounce of strength left in her. The fabric sailed across the room, landing on the bed in a heap. For a moment, silence. Then the bed shifted. The mattress dipped inward as though something had lain down. The veil spread itself neatly across the pillow, the fabric smoothing out as if invisible hands prepared a resting place. Nora's chest seized. Her instincts screamed to flee, to get as far as possible from the room, the mirror, the veil. She turned to the door, but it was gone. Where it had once been stood a wall, her throat tightened, bile rising in panic. She spun back, and her reflection still wore the veil, still smiling. This time the image stepped forward. Her mirror self pressed its hands against the glass. Cracks spider-webbed outward, each one sharp and splintering like lightning frozen in place. Nora backed away, stumbling until she hit the opposite wall. The reflection's hands pushed harder, glass bowing outward, trembling. Shards fell to the floor with crystalline chimes. With a sound like bones snapping, the reflection stepped through. Her own body, her own frame, but veiled, hollow-eyed lips, stretched in Kate's smile, emerged from the fractured mirror. The air grew heavier, as though the room itself bowed to the presence of something older, more powerful than grief. Nora's voice cracked in terror. "You're not me." The figure tilted its head. Its voice echoed, layered with both hers and Kate's. "I am what you will be. I am what you already are." The veil on the bed lifted once more, as if eager to complete what had begun, and the door, long vanished, reappeared behind Nora with a slow creak. Only now it stood slightly open. From beyond came the low, steady hum of voices, waiting, hundreds of them murmuring the same words in unison. "Your room is ready." The words echoed in a rhythm that felt alive, as though the very bones of the hotel chanted them. "Your room is ready." Nora pressed herself against the wall, every nerve in her body urging her to run, yet her legs refused to move. the figure, the veiled version of herself, stood between her and the bed. Its face was hidden, but the weight of its gaze pressed against her skin like cold fingers. The veil on the bed shifted again, sliding off the mattress and gliding across the floor. It didn't crumple. It moved smoothly, like water flowing uphill, until it reached Nora's shoes. The hem brushed against her ankles with the chill of grave soil. She staggered back toward the door that had reappeared, heart-hammering. Her hand fumbled for the handle. The wood was damp beneath her fingers, as though the door itself had been breathing. She yanked it open. A wall of guests stood on the other side. They filled the hallway from end to end, their faceless heads tilted toward her. Each one wore a veil black fabric draped loosely, swaying as though moved by an invisible wind. Their murmuring grew louder, spilling into the room like an icy tide. "Your room is ready. Your room is ready. Your room is ready." Her chest clenched. She slammed the door shut, choking on her breath. The veiled figure in the room hadn't moved, but now it raised one hand, pointing silently toward the bed, where the veil waited. Nora shook her head so violently her vision blurred. No, I won't wear it. I won't." The journal snapped open again on the floor. Pages turned rapidly before stopping on a single line scrawled in frantic ink. "You cannot escape. The only way out is through." Her eyes burned. She picked it up, hands trembling, and hurled it against the wall. The sound cracked like a gunshot, echoing long after the book had fallen silent. The mirror remained broken, its edges jagged. In the fragments, her reflection stared back in dozens of pieces, each shard showing her face, veiled, smiling, already gone. The humming grew deeper, rising into a chant that shook the air. The chandelier in the hallway rattled, droplets of dust drifting down. The entire hotel seemed to lean closer, listening. Nora's breath rasped. Her body felt cornered, trapped between the bed, the mirror, the door. Every path led to the veil. She lunged toward the window again. This time she grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and hurled it into the glass. It shattered with a scream of breaking metal and fire. For an instant, night air rushed in sharp, with salt and sea. Hope flared until she saw it. The ocean was gone again. In its place, a vast ballroom stretched into infinity. Hundreds of veiled figures moved in slow circles across the polished floor, waltzing to music too faint to be real. The sound reached her in fragments. Violins played off keynotes, stretched until they broke. And at the center of the ballroom, Kate stood. She was not blurred, not veiled. Her face was sharp, her eyes burning with pale fire. She lifted her hand in a graceful beckon, her voice threading through the broken window like silk. "Come, Nora. The dance has already begun." The veiled figure behind her in the room stepped forward, closer, hand still outstretched. Nora's pulse screamed in her ears as she realized she was being pulled in two directions, toward Kate's invitation and toward the veil that waited for her. And all around her the chant rose to a fevered pitch. "Your room is ready. Your room is ready. Your room is ready." The chant was a storm. It surged against the walls, rattled the floorboards beneath her feet, poured through her lungs like smoke she could not cough out. Nora clutched the window frame, her knuckles white. Beyond the ballroom shifted in and out of focus rows of chandeliers, swaying as though moved by a phantom wind, veiled dancers gliding in endless spirals. The violins scraped louder, their broken notes bleeding into a rhythm that almost sounded like a heartbeat. Kate stood at the center, her pale hands folded neatly before her, her eyes fixed on Nora. Though the music distorted her voice, cut clean through it, soft yet commanding. "Don't fight, you belong here." The veiled double stepped closer from behind. Nora felt the air tighten around her, as if the figure carried its own gravity. Its hands lifted again, patient, unhurried, waiting to place the veil that seemed destined to fall over her head. Her chest heaved. She turned back to Kate. "Why me? Why now?" Kate smiled faintly, tilting her head. Because you're listening. Because you can see what others cannot. She stepped forward in the ballroom, her movement gliding like silk across water. They hear whispers and forget them by morning. But you held on. You let the hotel in. The words burrowed into Nora's mind, sickly sweet. She gripped the frame tighter, desperate not to fall through the broken glass and into that endless ballroom. Behind her, the double shadow stretched, long-reaching. The journal abandoned on the floor fluttered open again, its pages whipping wildly, though no breeze stirred the room. Words scrawled across the paper, jagged and uneven, as though written in a hand fighting against its own strength. Do not dance. Do not wear the veil. To do either is to never leave. Nora's eyes flicked between the two choices. The ballroom with its dancers beckoned with haunting beauty, Kate's voice threading through the music like a promise. The veil loomed nearer its fabric, whispering against her skin without touching. She screamed, the sound raw, torn from her chest. "What do you want from me?" Kate's answer was soft, but the hotel itself seemed to carry her voice. Witness. At that word, every dancer in the ballroom froze mid-step. Their veils turned toward her in unison, faceless attention, pressing down on her like a weight. The veiled double behind her stopped too, its hands hovering inches above her shoulders. The silence that followed was worse than the chant, worse than the violins. Then a low groan vibrated through the hotel. The walls of the room rippled. The mirror shards at her feet rattled and rolled. The roses on the wallpaper shriveled to black husks, then bloomed again, their petals dripping with what looked like ink. Nora stumbled forward, shards of glass crunching beneath her shoes. The window yawned wider, impossibly, so stretching until it framed the entire ballroom, as though her room had simply been absorbed into it. Kate reached out a hand, her palm pale, her smile patient. The veiled double lowered its hand slowly as if in surrender. Yet the veil itself lifted from the floor once more, hovering between them all like a living thing. The choice had crystallized. Dance veil or refuse. But somewhere deep in her chest, Nora felt the faintest tremor of defiance. The journal's words echoed again, as though burned into her skin. Do not dance. Do not wear the veil. Her eyes darted to the chandelier above its crystals, trembling, its chain straining against the ceiling. If she couldn't choose either path, perhaps she could break them both. She reached for the shattered lamp still sparking on the floor. The lamp hissed faintly in her hands, its wires sparking as though protesting her grip. Nora tightened her hold anyway, eyes locked on the chandelier above. The ballroom shimmered beyond the broken window, Kate's pale hand still reaching for her patience certain. The veil drifted in the stale air like a living shadow waiting to fall. Her pulse roared. The chant resumed low and insistent. Your room is ready. Your room is ready. She raised the lamp higher, her arms trembling. The chandelier swayed harder as though it already knew. Dust rained down in soft clouds, glowing faintly in the unnatural light. Nora screamed a sound born of fear and fury and hurled the lamp upward. The explosion was blinding. Sparks burst against the ceiling, arcing in jagged flashes before the chain finally snapped. The chandelier plummeted. The crash tore through the air like thunder. Shards of glass exploded in every direction, cutting across the wallpaper, embedding in the wood, slicing across Nora's arms. She gasped, but didn't falter. The veil shrieked, as if it had a voice folding in on itself, before disintegrating into ash that scattered across the bed. The ballroom beyond the window flickered, its dancers twitching in broken, jerky motions. Kate's face blurred, then sharpened again, her smile twisting. For the first time, her voice wavered. You can't destroy us. You only wake us deeper. The walls groaned, splitting with hairline cracks that spread like veins. The floor beneath Nora rippled boards, buckling under unseen weight. She staggered backward, her breath ragged. For one brief heartbeat, she thought the destruction might collapse. The room, might tear the illusion down completely. But then the voices returned stronger, sharper, no longer a chant, but a command. Stay. The broken glass of the chandelier lifted itself from the floor, suspended in the air. Each shard reflected not her face, but Kate's. Dozens of eyes, dozens of smiles, all staring at her at once. Nora's throat burned as she whispered, "I won't." The fragments swirled faster, forming a vortex that threatened to swallow the entire room. Her hair whipped wildly around her face, the pull dragging her toward the center of the storm. The window dissolved into shadow. The ballroom gone, leaving only a spiraling black void. Kate's voice whispered from every shard, "Then you'll never leave." The floor split open beneath Nora, an endless chasm yawning wide. The pull grew unbearable. Her feet skidded across the wood, dragging her closer, closer. She clung to the bed frame splinters digging into her palms, but the force was relentless. The journal, somehow still whole, slid across the floor toward her, its cover snapping open. One final line seared itself into the paper, glowing red. "If you will not wear the veil, you must take the vow." Nora stared at the words, her mind reeling, her body trembling at the edge of the void. The shards sang around her in Kate's voice. The air was nothing but dark wind and the promise of endless falling. Her choices had narrowed again. The veil was gone. The dance had vanished. Only the vow remained. The words glowed so bright on the page, they burned themselves into her vision. "If you will not wear the veil, you must take the vow." Nora's hands trembled against the splintered bed frame, her knuckles raw and bleeding. The vortex of glass shards spun faster, their edges slicing the air, humming in a pitch that rattled her bones. The voices inside the shards had merged into one. Kate's voice stretched and multiplied, yet still intimate, still sharp enough to cut. "Take the vow, Nora. Take it and you'll finally understand." The floor creaked, then cracked open wider. A smell rose up from the chasm below, damp and old like seawater trapped beneath stone. Nora gagged at the brine-sweet rot of it. The pull dragged her closer, until her toes dangled over the edge, the abyss waiting hungrily. She stared down into it, half expecting to see darkness. But there was no darkness. Beneath her churned an ocean-black water, frothing without sound, waves crashing in silence. And on the tide floated hundreds of veils, hundreds of them spreading like jellyfish across the sea. Each one drifted lazily, waiting. Her chest tightened. The journal's page turned by itself, slamming flat again. The words shifted, curling into new shapes before her eyes. "The vow binds you to witness, to speak what has been forgotten, to remember what no one else dares to keep." Nora's head spun. "No," she rasped. "I won't. I don't want this. I just want out." The shards froze midair. For one terrifying moment, silence. Then they tilted in unison like dozens of heads bowing. The Kate in every shard smiled wider. "Want doesn't matter. The vow is already in you. You brought it when you came here." The air pressed heavy against her chest. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to deny it, scream it wasn't true. But a memory surfaced, unbidden, her first night in the hotel, sitting in the lobby, feeling that shiver of déjà vu. The hush in the wallpaper. The way she'd lingered when she should have fled. Had the vow begun the moment she arrived? The glass shards pulsed with light, 100 Kate voices chanting as one. "Speak it, take it, seal it." Nora's throat burned as though hands were tightening around it. Words clawed at the back of her tongue, pushing to escape. She bit down, shaking her head violently, but her jaw ached with the force of something trying to pry it open. The journal flared again. One more line appeared, the ink bleeding like a wound. "Say it, and you will live to see. Resist, and you will join the drowned." The chasm below surged. A wave of black water rose up higher and higher, carrying with it the drifting veils. They spread outward like wings, hundreds of them rising toward her, reaching. The shards swirled tighter around her head, their points aimed inward. Kate's voice whispered softer now, almost tender. "It's not death I'm offering you. It's memory. Don't you want to remember?" Nora's lips parted despite herself, the vow pressing forward like it had always been waiting inside her. And from the chasm below, the voices rose with the tide. "Your room is ready. Your vow is ready." Her breath broke and she realized she was about to speak. The words clawed their way up her throat, searing unstoppable. Nora tried to clamp her jaw shut, but her own body betrayed her. A whisper slipped past her lips, trembling, fragile. "I vow." The shards of glass froze mid-spin. The black tide below grew still, its countless veils hovering just beneath the surface waiting. Nora's chest heaved. The words weren't hers, not entirely. They pressed through her heavy with centuries spoken by countless voices before. Her own voice was only the vessel to remember what others forget. The journal snapped shut, the sound sharp as a gunshot. The vow was binding itself. The shards pulsed with light. Kate's face in every fragment leaned closer, smiling with something that was almost triumph, almost sorrow, to witness what must be seen. Her body convulsed, her knees buckling. The vow was dragging itself out of her ceiling, around her ribs coiling like chains. And to carry the weight of silence, the last word left her in a strangled cry. Silence followed. The vortex of shards shattered outward, embedding themselves in the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The room quaked once, then stilled. The abyss closed in a slow, reluctant sigh, swallowing its black water, sealing the veils beneath. When the floor steadied, only dark stains remained where the chasm had opened. The air was heavy with dust. The roses on the wallpaper stilled their petals, wilting into gray husks. Nora collapsed to her knees, gasping. Her throat ached raw, her chest heavy. The vow had settled inside her like stone. From the silence, Kate's voice threaded through again, no longer multiplied, no longer echoing. Just her clear and close. "You've done it. You're ours now." Nora lifted her head, sweat dripping into her eyes. The ballroom window was gone. The broken glass had vanished. But Kate stood in the corner of the room, fully present, veilless, her figure sharp as reality. Her eyes glowed faintly pale and patient. Nora tried to speak, but her lips felt sewn shut. Her breath rattled out in shallow gasps. Kate stepped forward, each movement slow, deliberate, her shadow stretching unnaturally long across the warped floor. "The vow keeps you alive," she whispered, "but it binds you to the hotel. You'll see what others can't. You'll hear what they won't. You'll remember what they bury." She tilted her head, watching Nora tremble. "And you'll never truly leave." Nora pressed her back against the bed frame, her voice barely a rasp. "I didn't want this." Kate knelt close enough that her cold breath brushed against Nora's ear. "No one ever does." The lights in the room flickered, dimmed, then burned out completely. And in the dark, the hotel's voices began again, low and steady. No longer a chant, but a murmur, meant for her alone. "Witness, remember, Carrie." Nora closed her eyes, but there was no escaping it. The vow had been spoken. The vow had been heard. The darkness pressed against Nora like a second skin. It wasn't absence. It was presence, heavy and alive, every inch of it humming with awareness. She could hear her own pulse, ragged and uneven, but beneath it ran another rhythm, the deep and steady heartbeat of the hotel itself. Her breath hitched. The vow coiled tighter in her chest, a weight and a wound at once. She felt it pulsing under her sternum, as if something foreign had been sewn into her veins. The murmur of voices surrounded her. They weren't chanting anymore. They were speaking, whispering in fragments. Snatches of memory spilled like blood on the floor. The fire in the West Wing. The drowned girl beneath the pool tiles. She still wears the veil in room 332. Don't look in the mirror after midnight. Each word pressed into her skull. Each phrase felt true. Nora staggered to her feet. her hand sliding against the wall for balance. The wallpaper roses brushed her skin, brittle as ash. When she pulled her hand back, it was blackened with soot. Her knees wobbled, but she forced herself forward. The door was still there, though warped now, its frame bent inward as if the hallway beyond were straining to push through. She wrapped her fingers around the handle, cold, colder than ice. The vow pulsed inside her again, resisting. She swallowed hard and twisted. The door opened. The hallway stretched before her longer than she remembered, lined with sconces flickering faintly. Every bulb burned weakly yellow, each one buzzing as though on the brink of dying out. The carpet ran endlessly red and frayed, its floral pattern writhing with shapes she couldn't quite name, and the silence, unnatural silence, until a single footstep echoed at the far end. Nora froze. The figure stood just beyond the reach of the last light, motionless, watching. For one breathless moment, she thought it was Kate. But then the figure shifted forward, and she saw its face was wrapped entirely in white cloth. A veil tied too tightly, stretching smooth over its skull. No eyes, no mouth, only the outline of something underneath, pressing faintly against the fabric. Nora stumbled back a step. The figure took one forward. Her throat clenched. The vow surged, and with it clarity. This was not one spirit. This was many. 1,000 fragments folded into one faceless witness, bound to the same silence, now coiled in her own chest. She whispered hoarsely, "What do you want from me?" The figure stopped tilting its veiled head. Then the fabric around where its mouth should be rippled. Her own voice came back at her, distorted, speaking words she had not yet said. "You're going to walk these halls. You're going to listen. And you're going to remember, for all of us." The lights above flickered violently. For a second, the hall was full-lined on both sides with dozens of veiled figures standing perfectly still, their heads all turning toward her in unison. The sconces buzzed, the carpet writhed, the vow burned hotter in her chest. Nora braced her hand against the wall to keep from collapsing. The whisper wasn't just in her head, it was in the air, thick and undeniable. "Your night begins now." And as the hall stretched longer, impossibly longer, she realized the hotel had no dawn. The hallway exhaled a soundless breath, and the air turned heavy with dust and perfume that had no origin. Nora's lungs burned as she dragged in the scent, a cloying mixture of wilted roses and mildew. The veiled figures lining the walls didn't move, didn't sway yet. Their stillness pressed against her like a weight. Her vow pulsed again, constricting her ribs, urging her forward. The carpet beneath her feet felt damp now, as though soaked with something long spilled. She forced her legs to move. One step, another. The sconces dimmed behind her, leaving each part of the hall swallowed in dark once she passed. It became clear quickly there was no going back. She glanced sideways. The nearest veiled figure stood so close she could have reached out and touched it. Its head tilted toward her as she passed the fabric, pressing inward, as though the face beneath were straining to emerge. A whisper crawled into her ear. "Room 422. Her steps faltered. She turned sharply, but the figure hadn't moved. Its veiled face smoothed back into blank silence. Another one spoke from the other side of the hall. The voice, sharp, rasping. "Don't open the dresser." Nora's mouth dried. The vow hummed, feeding the voices directly into her blood. She stumbled onward, the words falling around her like ash. The elevator doesn't stop at the top floor. The mirror in the parlor shows them. Not, "You don't drink the water." Don't drink the water. She clutched her temples, but the whispers came from inside now, their warnings burrowing behind her eyes. Each veiled figure turned slightly as she passed heads, twitching shoulders rigid. Watching, the hall bent suddenly unnaturally, as though the walls had folded in on themselves. The carpet ran uphill, the sconces leaned, and at the end loomed a door. Black wood warped its brass number plate, gleaming 422. Her stomach dropped. The vow thrummed violently, each beat slamming into her ribs like a fist. It wanted her to go inside. The figures closest to the door leaned toward it, their veils fluttering with a breath she could not feel. Nora whispered, "I don't want this." The door handle clicked on its own, turning slowly. Her pulse thundered. She stepped forward, her hand shaking as it rose, not because she wanted to open it, but because the vow demanded it. The door creaked open. Inside was no room. No carpet, no bed, no walls. Only a staircase descending into darkness, the air cold and damp as though the ocean itself waited below. A dozen whispers hissed behind her at once, sharp enough to sting. Go down, go down." Her breath caught. She looked back. The hallway was empty now. Every figure had vanished, the sconces extinguished, leaving only the open door and the waiting stairs. The vow burned inside her, insistent, and though every part of her screamed to run her foot, lifted trembling and found the first step. The staircase groaned beneath her weight. Somewhere deep below, something breathed. The stairs seemed endless, swallowing her downward step by step. Each groan of the wood echoed too long, as though the sound traveled far deeper than the stairwell could possibly reach. The air grew colder, heavy with damp salt. Her fingertips brushed the walls as she descended stone, now not plaster, slick, breathing with moisture. Her vow throbbed with each step, dragging her further, even as her body resisted. She gripped the railing, but the iron was warm, pulsing faintly like it had veins. At the bottom, a faint light shimmered. Not steady, not fire. Something else like moonlight trapped beneath water. Nora's shoes sank into sand. She froze. The staircase ended, not in a basement, but on a shore, an underground beach where black waves lapped soundlessly against the sand. The horizon stretched out endless and starless, as though the ocean lived in the bones of the hotel. Dozens of veils floated on the surface, undisturbed by the tide. Pale cloth drifting in slow circles, their edges glowing faintly in the strange light. Nora's breath caught in her throat. The vow inside her pulsed, tugging, urging her forward. Then she saw her, Kate. She stood ankle-deep in the black surf, facing the horizon veil, gone her hair slick against her back. Her white dress fluttered, though there was no wind. Nora's lips trembled. She wanted to call her name, but no sound came out. Kate turned slowly. Her face was pale eyes, hollow yet piercing. The faintest smile tugged at her lips. "You found it," she whispered, though the distance between them was too great for such words to carry. Still, they reached Nora's ears, clear as thought. What is this place?" Nora managed, her voice fragile. Kate tilted her head. "The heart of the vow, where memory is kept, where silence is drowned." Nora's pulse stuttered. The veils on the water drifted closer, circling Kate like obedient shadows. Beneath the surface movement, rippled shapes swimming just out of sight. Kate lifted her hand. "You're one of us now. You have to choose witness or drown." Nora stumbled back a step. "I never wanted this." The vow throbbed violently in her chest, doubling her over. The sand beneath her feet shifted, dragging her toward the water. Kate's expression softened, almost pitying. "None of us did. That's the vow's cruelty. It doesn't ask, it takes." The waves swelled black water, licking higher up the shore. The veils rose, with it dozens of faceless outlines beneath the cloth beginning to stir. Figures beneath the fabric pressed upward, straining their forms, twisted and incomplete. The vow burned hotter in her chest, urging her forward, dragging her like a tide. Kate's voice came again, low and final. "Step into the water, Nora. If you resist, you'll be pulled under. If you obey, you'll see what they showed me." The black tide rushed forward, soaking her shoes, her ankles. Cold so deep it cut like knives. Behind her, the staircase had already vanished. The only way left was into the sea. The first bite of the black water stole Nora's breath. It wasn't just cold, it was hollow, as if the sea itself had no substance, only hunger. Her skin stung, then numbed as the tide pulled higher past her knees, drawing her toward Kate. The veils, circling in the surf, drifted closer. their fabric twitching as though stirred by invisible limbs beneath. Nora tried to fight the pull, planting her feet in the shifting sand, but the vow inside her burned hotter, demanding obedience. Her chest throbbed in rhythm with the tide as if the ocean itself had taken hold of her pulse. Kate stood calm in the water, watching her with patient, hollow eyes. The veils swirled around her like a crown of phantoms. "You'll see it now," Kate murmured, her voice carrying unnaturally over the waves. The memories they buried, the truth this hotel feeds upon. The water rose to Nora's waist. She gasped, the cold sinking deep into her bones. A veil brushed against her shoulder, damp cloth clinging to her skin, and beneath it fingers, cold, boneless fingers sliding across her arm before retreating. Her throat tightened. "No." Kate stepped closer, the water parting for her. She raised her hand, brushing her fingers lightly across Nora's temple. The touch was both tender and scalding, leaving a trail of heat that sank into her skull. "Don't fight it," Kate whispered. "Let it show you." The ocean roared. Suddenly the world broke. Nora's vision shattered into fragments, sharp and blinding. She was no longer in the water, but inside a dozen memories at once, each tearing through her like glass. A man in 1892, standing at the hotel's grand staircase, rope in hand, his face pale with terror. A woman in 1927, slipping beneath the pool tiles, her eyes wide as unseen hands dragged her down. Children in the West Wing huddled beneath their beds during a fire, the smoke curling into the wallpaper like claws. A soldier in uniform standing in a mirror and finding not his own reflection, but rows of faceless veils staring back. A maid carrying fresh sheets pausing outside room 422, whispering, "Don't open the dresser," before disappearing into nothing. The visions stabbed into her mind, each one overlapping, suffocating. Her scream dissolved into the black water, swallowed whole. When the tide spat her out, she was on her knees in the surf, gasping. The veils floated in a wide circle around her, motionless now as though they had finished their work. Kate knelt in front of her eyes, burning faintly. "Now you understand. The vow is not a curse. It's a burden. Every horror, every silence, every forgotten scream, you will carry it. You will remember." Nora shook her head violently, her voice hoarse. "I can't." Kate's hand cupped her chin, forcing her gaze upward. "You already do." And in the reflection of Kate's black eyes, Nora saw herself not as she was, but as one of them. A veil clung to her face, pulsing faintly with breath, faceless and eternal. The tide surged higher. The ocean was claiming her. The tide swallowed Nora's waist, dragging at her ribs with a steady, merciless pull. Her hands clawed at the water, but there was nothing to grip, only the slick brush of unseen bodies just below the surface. Each time she thrashed, her fingers grazed cloth skin hair. Kate held her steady by the chin, eyes glowing faintly in the moonless light. "It won't kill you," she said, her voice steady, unyielding. "Death would be too kind. It binds you instead. It binds us all." Nora tried to wrench away, but the vow burned so hot inside her chest that it was like a brand pressed into her heart. She gasped, each breath shallow. Why me?" Kate's lips curved into a sorrowful smile. "Because you came willingly. Because you asked the wrong questions in the right place. That's all it takes. One curious soul to feed the silence." The black water lapped at her shoulders. Nora's reflection shimmered faintly on the surface, except it wasn't her face. The veil was already there, ghostly white, fluttering like breath beneath the waves. Panic surged. She screamed, her voice raw, but the sound bent unnaturally, splitting into whispers that spun out across the ocean. The veils drifting nearby stirred heads turning toward her, each whisper feeding into a chorus that wasn't hers anymore. Kate let go of her chin and stepped back, vanishing waist-deep in the dark surf. She lifted her arms as if inviting the tide itself to rise. Let go, Nora. The longer you resist, the deeper they'll drag you. And if they drag you too far, there will be nothing left to bind. Only hunger. Nora's chest constricted. The vow pulsed violently, and she understood this was the choice. Not freedom, never freedom, but a kind of survival. If she accepted the veil, she would carry the silence. If she rejected it, the ocean would devour her entirely. Her body shook salt, burning her lips. The water surged higher to her neck. The veils drifted closer, brushing her skin, their cloth slick and clinging. Fingers pressed faintly against her throat, against her jaw, guiding the fabric toward her face. No, she cried, thrashing. The ocean roared louder, and beneath the surface eyes blinked open. Dozens of them, pale, unblinking, watching from just below the waterline. Kate's voice came one last time, distant now, echoing from everywhere at once. You already chose the moment you walked in. The first veil pressed against her mouth. Cold, suffocating. Her scream vanished into fabric, and in the instant before darkness claimed her, Nora understood this wasn't drowning. This was becoming. The veil sealed itself to Nora's skin with a wet hiss, clinging as though it had always belonged there. Her breath stopped, but strangely, she did not suffocate. Instead, the fabric seemed to breathe for her, pulling the tide in and exhaling it as whispers. Each inhale filled her chest with cold. Each exhale carried voices that were not her own. The ocean stilled. The veils that had drifted aimlessly now bent toward her in unison, their faceless forms bowing ever so slightly. She could feel them, not just see them, but sense their weight pressing against her thoughts. Their memories pressed into her skull, ancient and fractured, threading through her veins like smoke. Nora staggered backward, the surf releasing her legs, as though the sea itself now recognized her. The vow inside her chest no longer burned. Instead, it pulsed faintly in rhythm with the tide, as though her heart had been replaced by the ocean's own. She reached for her face instinctively, clawing at the veil, but her fingers passed through it like water. It wasn't cloth, it was her now. Kate stood further out in the black water, veilless, her pale face watching with solemn calm. You see, she said softly, her voice carrying as if through the bones of the hotel itself. It doesn't end, it only changes shape. Nora tried to speak, but the words that emerged were not hers. Dozens of voices overlapped, all tumbling through her throat. Remember us. Remember the fire. Remember the silence. Remember. She staggered, clutching her chest. The voices quieted, leaving only her ragged breathing. Why me? She whispered, though the sound came muffled through the veil. Kate tilted her head, sorrow shadowing her features. Because the hotel chose you. Because the vow needed another keeper. She paused, then added, and because I can't carry it alone anymore. At those words, the water around Kate began to swirl. Veils lifted from the surface, circling her. Her form blurred, unraveling, like mist torn apart by wind. Her voice drifted faint and final. You will carry them now, Nora. Their stories, their silence, their weight. Then she was gone. The sea folded into itself, collapsing with a soundless ripple. The veils sank, vanishing beneath the surface. The tide receded in a single breath, leaving Nora standing on damp sand, the underground ocean gone, as though it had never existed. Behind her, the staircase reappeared, its wooden steps stretching upward into shadow. Her body trembled. Every instinct screamed to climb, to flee, yet she knew there was no return to who she had been. The vow was carved into her marrow now, the veil fused to her face, the whispers gnawing softly in the corners of her mind. She turned toward the stairs, her foot finding the first creaking step. Each climb upward echoed louder than the last, the sound following her like a heartbeat. And with every step, the hotel seemed to breathe her name. "Welcome home, Nora." The staircase seemed longer than before, each step stretching into silence as though the hotel itself measured her climb. The faint salt of the vanished sea lingered in her throat, and the whispers in her chest moved like restless birds, shifting, pressing against her ribs. At last, she emerged into the dim hall above. The corridor was empty still, its wallpaper pale and faded. Yet she felt it alive around her. The carpet fibers curled faintly under her feet. The sconces hummed, though no flame burned. Every detail of the Hotel del Coronado had changed. She had crossed into its deeper truth. She touched her face, expecting to feel cloth. But the veil was intangible, a weightless film that existed only in reflection. In the glass of a framed picture, she glimpsed herself veiled, faceless, the fabric shifting faintly with her breath. Her stomach turned. The whispers swelled, tugging her toward the west wing. She obeyed, without meaning to her steps, carrying her to the hall of closed doors. She felt them vibrate as she passed, as though those who once stayed within pressed their hands against the wood. Each door hummed with stories, their silence aching to be broken. The dresser in room 422 waited for her. She knew it before she saw it. The door opened at her touch. Inside the room was bare, stripped of all warmth. The dresser stood solitary against the wall, its wood dark, its drawers shut. The vow inside her pulsed. Her hand moved on its own, pulling open the top drawer. Inside lay another veil. White, perfectly folded, waiting. Her chest tightened as the whispers inside her surged louder, urgent. They wanted release. They wanted another. She understood. Kate had passed it to her. Now she would pass it to someone else. The vow was never hers to keep, it was hers to carry until another crossed the threshold, until another curious soul leaned too close to the silence. She closed the drawer, her hands trembling. The hotel settled around her like a living thing satisfied. Nora sat on the bed, the faint sound of waves brushing her ears, though no ocean could be seen. She closed her eyes, her breath slow, the veil shifting faintly with each exhale. Somewhere in the halls, a bell chimed. A door creaked open. Footsteps echoed hesitant. A new guest had arrived, and Nora felt the vow stir within her, patient and hungry. The story of Nora and the Hotel del Coronado lingers long after the last whisper fades. The hotel stands still beneath the San Diego sky, its red roof bright against the sea, its windows reflecting light as if nothing waits within. Yet in its quiet halls, echoes live. Doors that open to no one, voices that speak through silence, and a vow that binds the curious to memories too heavy to forget. Perhaps it is just folklore born of old tragedies, that hotels like this inevitably gather fires, drownings, untimely endings that guests whisper about, but never fully believe. Or perhaps, as Nora discovered, the walls themselves remember carrying every sorrow like salt in the tide, never washed away. Tonight, as you close your eyes, you don't need to carry Nora's burden. Her vow is hers alone, etched into the corridors of that place, sealed in the wood and sea air. For you, there is only the quiet of your room, the steady hum of your fan, the gentle dark that holds no secrets. Let the story dissolve now like mist rolling back from the shore. Whatever lingered in the tale will stay where it belongs, behind closed doors, folded away like a veil in a drawer you will never open. Breathe slow. Feel your body settle into the weight of your bed, safe, steady. Let the silence here be kind, free of whispers. Sleep waits, patient and gentle, carrying you not into the vow of shadows, but into your own dreams.